Hello, and welcome to period 9. So, we are on these notes. I'm not going to tell you what the connect the dot is because that would be unfair. But we're going to go over everything you would need to know about period 9. Yay! Okay, so let's get started, shall we? Okay, here we go. So, in terms of period 9 is from 1980 all the way up until present day. Doesn't have as many specifics, and it's really not that much stuff. There's only a few things that you will really need to know, but hopefully this will at least give you some little pop terms that you could possibly be able to use into an essay or use on a multiple choice. You'll probably only have one stimulus on it, so you guys are going to do great. I know it. All right, so let's start with what's known as the new conservatism. Now, next to new conservatism, what I would write is I would write the traditional, stereotypical Republican. 1980 is the year that we're going to now have the Republicans really come out here. And that's a modern-day Republicans. This is where we get our modern-day political parties. So New Conservative comes off of New Deal. So basically what they felt like is Roosevelt's New Deal was a really big overstep. Way too much social welfare, way too much government overreach, and caused a lot of deficits, inflation, and unemployment. Basically everything in the 70s was due to the New Deal. Now, additionally, it was all about conservatism. The idea that you need to be conservative, traditional. Like Roe v. Wade. Roe v. Wade is not traditional. It's completely, and a lot of people, some people say it's anti-Christian. It is not the traditional Republican way. So new conservatives are going to come out and feel like they want to go towards traditional values. Now, the best example of conservatism, and the one that you need to put down, is Ronald Reagan. He is going to be the stereotypical Republican that is really going to define who are the modern-day Republicans. So let's talk about Ronald Reagan. Now, Ronald Reagan is going to come into the presidency, and he has three major priorities. Increased military spending, which he succeeds at. Keeping us, at the same time, keeps us Soviet Union, which works. Cutting domestic spending, which he does. And government-sponsored social programs are going to be cut as well. And cutting the federal income tax. Basically, he does everything that he wanted to do. And that's what makes him controversial. He did expand the military, he did cut taxes, and he did end a lot of social or domestic programs. Now, this brings us to what is known as Reaganomics or the Reagan Revolution. So this entire section on your paper needs to be double-starred, know it. It's the most likely question that's going to be on the AP exam. So let's talk about Reaganomics. Well, first off, Reagan's going to cut a lot of federal programs. Social Security, food stamps. All those social welfare programs are going to be completely cut. So think about Obamacare getting cut. That's really what he's going to do here. Reagan is very similar to Trump in a lot of ways. A lot of things that Trump does right now is very similar to Reagan. So cutting those federal programs. Cutting the federal safety net, for example, or domestic spending. However, we are going to not only cut domestically, but we are also going to expand foreignly. So while we actually cut our domestics by a lot, we're actually going to expand our military, and I believe I have it on here, the exact... Well, I don't have it on here, but I believe, if I remember correctly, the expansion of military wealth expanded from something like $12 billion up to $70 billion. I mean, we massively expanded our military to what it is today. Now, Ronald Reagan also really hated labor unions. Oops, bookmarked. I didn't mean to do that. My bad. So this is the major pillars of this Reaganomics. So reduce federal income taxes. Basically, reduce all the taxes. Reduce federal spending. Reduce government regulation, which in theory will reduce inflation. Now, all of this had the goal of improving the economy. And the biggest thing is cutting taxes. You cut taxes, you're going to be able to improve the economy. Now, this happens with the same thing with Donald Trump. So Donald Trump also cut the income tax by a lot. This was the whole tax reform that happened last fall. Well, the goal of that is that if you cut these taxes, then what will happen is that you will be able to benefit businesses and they'll invest. So this is what you saw after the tax reform. Businesses such as Apple and Walmart begin to improve wages and give bonuses because of this tax break. However, this doesn't guarantee that a company is going to do that. For example, in Florida with Walt Disney, the Walt Disney Company said, sure, we'll give you $1,000, but you have to agree to these really strict union membership guidelines. So it can be a double-edged sword. Now, additionally, Reagan is going to also not like labor unions. Very, very anti-labor union. Did not believe union membership was okay. Very Republican ideology. What happens is you have what's known as the PATCO strike. So PATCO was basically all the air traffic controllers in America. They're going to go on strike. Reagan says if you don't get back on the job within the next 48 hours, you're fired. They didn't go back, and he's fired 11,000 federal employees in a single day. And he replaced them. He did not like union membership. This is why union membership had a fourth of the workforce in unions, and now it's only an eighth by the end of Reagan's term. Now, in the short term, there was little gain. It made a massive recession, which made Reagan look really bad. In the long term, though, when he goes up for re-election, the economy actually improves. Was this because of tax cuts or because he expanded the military? Who knows? But it does help in the long term, but not in the short term. Now, the biggest failure of Reagan's presidency, most people say, is the jump in federal deficit. Basically, because of the fact that we didn't have any taxes, you had to pay for the government somehow, so they're going to go into national debt. For example, during this time, our taxes are going to go so exponentially that we're going to go into our massive economic debt in America, really to what it is today. Now, additionally, this national debt is going to kind of trickle down to American consumers. American consumers are going to have debt, especially with credit card debt, and basically the entire nation is in massive amounts of debt. Now, Reagan was really popular, though, even in regards to all this. He had what's called popular patriotism. He was seen as a traditional American, very, very popular, especially against the USSR. So, general expansion of the Cold War. Reagan is going to want to solve the problem with Russia, and a lot of times he's considered kind of the savior of all of this and is going to end the Cold War. At least that's what he says. Now, we have a couple of really cool things that happened, and one of them is what's known as the Strategic Defense Initiative, otherwise known as the Star Wars Initiative. And this is pretty cool. Now, we have been putting things up into space. Remember the space race? This is what we decide. We're now going to put lasers into space. And the idea would be is that the USSR, if they ever shot a hydrogen bomb at us, well, we just shoot it down with our lasers. This is why it was called Star Wars. It was only about, 5 years after Star Wars had happened that they put this in. And the idea was to defeat the USSR. The USSR realized really quickly we weren't going to be able to do this. However, it was an attempt for us to be able to stop the USSR. Now, this brings us to the controversies, again, of Ronald Reagan. And it's going to come down to Latin America. So what happens is in Latin America, you're going to have all these coups. People are going to overthrow their government. Well, what happens is that here in America, we want this to stop, and we want stability and democracy in Latin and South America. Now, this is what's called a die-in, by the way, that you're seeing on this picture. Interesting fact about the die-ins, basically you, for a certain amount of time, pretend as if you are dead. We did the same thing with the walkouts a couple weeks ago. So if some of you went to the walkout and went to the Capitol and did the die-in, now you know. Now, we really want to stop terrorism in all of these Latin American areas. We want to stop terrorism and communism from spreading. Now, this brings us to what is known as the Iran-Contra affair, which I would star. Very interesting event in American history. Basically, here's what happens. Ronald Reagan wants to support funding to end these coups and support a democratic government in South and Latin America. The problem? Well, the issue is that he didn't have any money because Congress didn't want to do it. So this is what's going to happen. Now, according to Reagan, he didn't know about this. For the record, Reagan says he never knew about this. But here's what's going to happen. We are going to begin to sell illegal arms to Iran. So we're going to basically be funding, think about funding the Taliban or the Iraqi prisoners or Osama bin Laden. Think of it on that scale. And we sell these guns, take the profit, and then overthrow the coups and basically help out the government stabilize in South and Latin America. So it's a secret way to get money by selling arms to other people. I related that to Iron Man because I think Iron Man is a great example of everything that you're hearing about. Well, according to Nixon, he didn't know. However, all of his top aides knew, and a lot of people next to him said that they were aware of what was going on. Now, according to them, Reagan knew about it. Reagan says, no, my hands are clean. I didn't do anything. But this really goes and looks negatively upon Ronald Reagan and his presidency. Now, overall, once Reagan leaves, Reagan is never prosecuted. A lot of people said, now that I think about it, they probably should have impeached him. But Bush, so George H.W. Bush, is actually going to pardon everybody involved. So nobody gets in trouble for this Iran-Contra affair or secrecy selling arms to Iran. Now, the new Democrats are going to be created right after Reagan. Basically, they said that the only way for Democrats in order to win needs to become more conservative. And a great example of this is going to be Bill Clinton. He's going to be kind of the stereotypical conservative Democrat that you would have wanted. Bernie Sanders would be considered more of a liberal Democrat, or Hillary Clinton would be a conservative Democrat, things like that. So we're now going to end the Cold War. And you need to really circle the name Khrushchev to Gorbachev. Now, Gorbachev is the one that you really need to know. Khrushchev was the one that's the Berlin Wall, arms race, brinkmanship, things like that. Gorbachev was young. He really wanted to reform what was going on in America. Now, he's going to have two different things with Gorbachev. The first thing is known as perestroika. Perestroika was basically an openness. And they wanted to be able to open up the economy while still keeping communist, but also wanting to make it more easy to be able to participate in the economy. Then they had what is known as glasnost. Sorry, I said that wrong the first time. Which was an openness. Basically, they allowed people to be able to join the government. The government was more open about what was going on. That's why you can get your files from East Berlin about all the spying that they did on all of you. And this is going to be a general openness in America. Now, Gorbachev and Reagan really did like each other. They had a really good friendship. And this really encouraged them to begin to mend these relationships between the USSR and the United States. Now, this is where you get the famous thing with Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan's going to go to the Berlin Wall. He's going to make this famous speech that says, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. We need to end this border between East Berlin and West Berlin." Now, this also contributes to what's known as the INF Treaty, which basically bans intermediate missiles and bombs from being sent from the USSR in America. So again, disarmament during this time. Now, in Berlin, or in Leipzig, we're going to have what's known as the Monday Revolutions, which is basically where people are going to uprise against their government in the USSR and say, we want a free East Berlin and East Germany. Well, what happens is that through all of this, the USSR is going to do a press release, an announcement that says, now we're going to allow travel between families. So now we can reunify families. Well, at midnight, this guy's super tired. They ask him, so do you mean that the Berlin Wall is gone? And they said, or open? And he said, yes. And now you have the fall of the Berlin Wall. So in theory, the fall of the Berlin Wall is the physical representation at the end of the Cold War. The Cold War officially ends in 1991 when the USSR is going to officially disband. Now, last two things really quick. Immigration. We have mass amounts of immigrants, legal and illegal, begin to come to America. Mexico and Canada were extremely hard to guard. Their borders were not well secure. And because of this, our immigrants are going to massively come into America, especially from Latin America and Asia, which you will need to know that it was Latin America and Asia. Now, this also begins our period of illegal immigration. Our illegal immigration is going to skyrocket as people begin to move closer to each other and begin to reunify their families, which is part of the reason why people wanted more of an openness, is to be able to reunify together as a common people. Now, a lot of this, another thing to do with all this immigration and things like that is what is called NAFTA. NAFTA is the North American Free Trade Agreement, which means that between the U.S., Canada, and Mexico, we allow free trade, as in we don't do tariffs or anything like that. Now, this works really well for America, Canada, and Mexico. It allows us to freely trade with each other. This is why when Trump wanted to institute a tariff against Mexico to pay for the wall, that's why it was so controversial. Would it reduce trade? Well, the thing is, as globalization occurs, so does job competition. As Mexicans begin to come into America or other immigrants because of this NAFTA deal, that begins to have job competition and additionally moving jobs out, which is why we have such an anti-immigrant statement amongst many different Americans. Last one is going to be the computers and the internet. It's basically just inventions. Now, the very first computers were huge. They were massive and took up many different rooms in a single space. Now, as we begin to increase, we begin to have the very first computers, which were really starting off as calculators, and then begin to do basic processes. Now, this brings us to a guy named Bill Gates, which I included the left-hand photo because he said it's his least favorite photo he's ever taken, so you got to include it on the PowerPoint. Now, Bill Gates, while Apple is going to build an actual personal computer that's cheap and small, Bill Gates is going to create software. Now, why this is different? He was asked to sell his software. And by selling his software, he'd get a big payday, maybe $50 million. But he's not going to do that. He's going to do royalties. So every single computer that has Microsoft, he gets money back in royalty. So let's say 1 cent for every single computer. Well, think about how many computers are in the world, multiply that, and that's how rich Bill Gates is going to be. Now, during the year 2000, and I remember this, you had what is known as Y2K, the year 2000. Now, what happened is that all the computers had only a 2-digit calendar system. So 99, 93, 89. And the problem was that when computers switched over, they didn't know what would happen. Would the computers explode? Would robots take over the world? Who knew? Because we didn't know what this little glitch that we didn't do in the 1970s of putting in multiple numbers, what it would do to our computers. Now, people really did think this was the end of the world. People thought that all the computers were going to shut down. If you think, oh, that's no big deal, no technology. Well, computers run your trains, your airplanes. It runs your, anything. How can you survive without it at this point in time? So people began to stock up. People began to think it was the complete end of the world. People were freaking out. Everyone was told to turn off their computers, anything electronic, because they thought the world was going to end. Get your flashlights. Well, guess what? Armageddon didn't happen. Nothing happened. The calendar changed. It was no big deal at all. Now, the last thing is Google. Google is obviously a verb. I'm going to Google that or whatever it could possibly be. Google becomes a search engine and massively expand our abilities with the internet. And that's period 9. The only thing left is roots of terrorism, which is going to be on a separate one. Go period 9.